go.
Good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to the continuing series of CPD lawyers seminar training, and we're now talking about the alcohol interlock sentence and how the alcohol interlocks work. So there's a little series of videos about this, and this is video 1. So just starting, if you'd like to turn to your materials at Alcohol Interlocks fact sheet 58, which is towards the end of your booklet. So just to start with, I thought that we might just discuss the basics that the clients need to know for what happens when they've had an alcohol interlock sentence. And then we'll go through the legislation for the lawyers and some other videos about how the legislation works and who qualifies for the alcohol interlock sentence, which is quite technical. But there's some basic things. So when someone is sentenced to an alcohol interlock sentence, they will get a specified period of disqualification, and that is the stand down period to get an alcohol interlock license, which they buy from the NZTA VTNZ shop, where you normally get your driver's license from. It's the top of the line license, it's pink, and it's $200. So the stand down periods to get it are variable. 28 days if it's a drink drive with nothing else, but if you've had injury or death involved, then the stand down period will be at least a year or a year and a day or longer. Or if you've had another other concurrent charge or charge that's not concurrent that had disqualifications, then you'll have a longer period that you might wait to get your alcohol interlock. But it'll be a specified period, and we'll talk about that in some later videos. So when your period of disqualification's up and you've been sentenced to an alcohol interlock sentence, you're actually going to get a piece of paper from the court on the day you're sentenced, which is your authority to get the alcohol interlock license, and you take that to the NZTA. So the NZTA have helpfully prepared, which you can get off their website. It's called the Interlock fact sheet 58. So after you have gone, you have to fill in an application to get the alcohol interlock license. So you're going to be needing to fill out a DL8 form at the NZTA. And this one is about what you're applying for. So in this one, you'll be ticking the box for the alcohol interlock license. It's also the same form you use for the Xero alcohol license, but that one is a different box that you tick. And that's when you're paying your $200. And then like your normal license, you're having a photograph taken, your eyes tested, then you'll get a paper one and the pink one posted in the mail. But with the alcohol interlock sentence, what is special is that you are required to get an alcohol interlock device fitted on your vehicle, and you may only drive a vehicle fitted with an alcohol interlock device. There are 2 approved providers in New Zealand. There is Dragar. I understand it's a Melbourne-based company. They actually manufacture the items that's used. And there's SmartStar, local company. And both of these have contracting providers, auto electronics workshops that fit the devices, and they're located all the way around New Zealand. And when you go to see the number, we'll call the 0800 number, there's a list of all the places they have providers at. Both of them have 0800 numbers that you can call, and they're very friendly and helpful. So you need some help. You need someone to help you to drive the car into, say, Smart Start. Then you're going to pay to have the interlock fitted on the vehicle. So the general cost, if you've got kind of the old style car where you've got to put a key in, is about $175 for installation. If you've got a fancy car that starts without the key, you know, you just press the button outside the car, that's going to have more costs to make that run. But at the point you've got that kind of fancy car, you can probably afford whatever the costs are for that. Then once you've paid for the installation, you will need to pay 1 month's rental up front. The cost with Smart Start is $183 a month. So it's $175 with a bit of insurance equals $183 a month. You must have the interlock on the vehicle for at least 12 months. And every month you've got to take the vehicle back into your provider, to the service centre as we call it, to have it calibrated. You get new mouthpieces and they can see how you go. So what happens is it's a bit like an FPOS machine. that every month you can get a printout and see how you did. So it doesn't print out in your car, but the electronics place can print it out for you. And at the end of the year, that printout goes to the NZTA, and they will have a look at it, because you can apply to come off the alcohol interlock license at the end of 12 months. And you're going to have to show that you've been very well behaved on that alcohol interlock license and not having any violations for at least the last 6 months of it. And if you haven't, and you've got violations in that last 3 months or so, they're not going to let you off. You'll have to stay on longer and perhaps do some rehabilitation programs. So say you've been good and you're all clear and you've had no violations in that last 6 months, then you can apply to come off it at the end of the year. So you'll have to pay a removal fee, and the removal fee is approximately about $175. Could be more if you have a fancy car. Then you've got to go back to the NZTA and you apply again by filling out the DL8 form again for the Xero alcohol license, which is $66.40. You need your ID again, you pay your money, have your eyes tested, your photograph taken, and you get a new license. Now, under the alcohol interlock laws, after you've had the interlock on for at least 12 months and then been approved to come off it and go on the Xero alcohol license, the Xero alcohol license is for 3 years. And then at the end of the 3 years, if you've been good and you haven't breached it, had no problems, then you can apply to come off it and go back onto a general full license if that's what you had, or restricted. So it is a process of a 4-year plan to help the client not drink drive. The first year on an interlock, which teaches the person what is Xero, because well, frankly there's like skepticism that they know what Xero is, since they did drink drive and either had a big level or were recidivist offenders. And then the Xero alcohol is just to try and keep them off the path of drink driving, and then hopefully they've turned the corner of the drink driving after that 4-year plan. Now, it is snakes and ladders. If at any time the person does another offence, another drink drive, or breaches the conditions of their licence, then they go back down. They have to repeat it again until they've got it right. So if they breach their alcohol interlock licence and do another crime of some kind and get disqualified, they're going to have to sit out that disqualification and then go back on their alcohol interlock licence until they finish that 12 months properly.
One question, what about Peter Eastwood, barrister, do a bit of drink drive, but not as expert, I think, as probably Karen. But just one question though, that people do ask, and that is, what happens if they don't get an interlock licence and then they're caught driving?
Okay, well,
but driving without it.
Okay,
What's
so
that?
remember that this video is just starting off with what the process is that you do when they've got it. But that's an important question, because
that happens quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, so say if someone gets a 28-day disqualification and then the authority to get the alcohol interlock, that doesn't mean they can drive on day 29 in their car and do anything they want. If they do not go to the NZTA and fill out this form and apply for the alcohol interlock license, they remain disqualified until they do it. So, they can be basically you're indefinitely disqualified until you go get it, because the only class of license the person can get is the alcohol interlock license on that sentence. So if you want a license, you have to go to the NZTA, pay your $200, buy it, and then you are required to fit the interlock. So there's many ways the clients can stuff this up, which keeps us really busy in court. So they can stuff it up by not going to the NZTA and buying the plastic license in the first place. They can stuff it up by getting the plastic license and then not putting the interlock on the vehicle. Then they will get a charge if they're caught driving without the interlock of driving contrary to the alcohol interlock license. Then the issue is whether they're drunk or not at the time.
It is an interesting charge, because driving contrary to an interlock license, there's a charge, but they actually technically don't have one, so they're not driving to one, are they? But it's just an interesting
Well, they'll be
legal
charged
point.
with driving while disqualified.
Yeah, but they can also be charged driving contrary to an interlock license when they don't have one. Isn't that right?
No, that's not true.
Not correct. Oh.
So if you have the alcohol interlock license, but you breach the conditions of it by, for example, ripping it out of the car or not driving a car with the interlock on it, and then you've got a charge of driving contrary to the alcohol interlock license. But if the client does not go to the NZTA and get the alcohol interlock license after that 28 days, they just remain disqualified. And that's a provision under the legislation that if they don't do it, they remain disqualified.
Well, I've known police charge them with driving contrary to an interlock license.
Yeah, but they might have got the pink plastic one.
Even though they haven't got one.
But they're actually driving while they're disqualified. Because they haven't got the license.
Yeah.
If you look at, this video was supposed to be about the steps for getting the alcohol interlock license, but just on that point, the answer is found in section 65AF. Alcohol interlock sentence disqualifies the person from driving except under alcohol interlock license. And this is what it says. A person who is subject to an alcohol interlock sentence and who does not apply for an alcohol interlock license is disqualified from holding or obtaining a driver's license. So you just remain disqualified until you go and get it. And then there's some other legislation under section 5AJ that if you're convicted of offence, while you're subject to your alcohol interlock sentence. So I wanted to go through the law on how all the alcohol interlock sections work, because it's actually quite complicated. It starts at section 65AB and then it's working its way all the way to section 65AK, like alphabet soup. But I think that's probably a second video, because we want to see what the sound quality is on this one. So shall we just ask Mr. Eastwood, for the benefit of the public and for the clients out there, if there is questions about the process of getting the alcohol interlock license from the NZTA.
Yeah, what is it? What is it going to? Well, it's mainly the consumers of it that are. What is the actual cost?
$200.
And then the weekly cost is around what?
Well, it's a monthly fee, and the monthly charge with Smart Start that I know of is $185 a month. So it's going to work out about $45 a week. If a client is financially embarrassed and not have a lot of funds and perhaps on a benefit, they can apply for a subsidy, and your interlock provider will advise the client about the subsidy options that you can get through WINS. Probation did have a subsidy arrangement if a person was sentenced to supervision for a term of 12 months or more. However, they don't always have that, and I think it may not currently be going at the moment. It'd be really good if the government would step up and fund that again, because that was really helpful for defendants. Other than that, I think having the interlock license is great, because if they weren't driving the car themselves anyway, they'd have to go catch the bus or an Uber or a taxi, which would end up probably costing more than sorting this out with the car. And it's personally, I think the interlock sentence is a great sentence, because you've got to remember, if the person is sentenced to the alcohol interlock sentence, the only license they can get is the alcohol interlock, because they blew either 800 breath or 160 blood or more, or they had 2 offences within 5 years of the specified nature under section 65AB and 65AC to be qualifying. They can't get a limited license, and they've got nothing. And some people might actually be going to be indefinitely disqualified under section 65, and that's where they get disqualified for indefinite, and then after a year and a day have to go to an assessment centre, and then they have to pass the assessment centre and then get the indefinite cancelled, then go and resit their driver's licence tests for the top class of licence and all endorsements for trucks and things, and their endorsements for reels, tracks and rollers, before they could drive again. Whereas if they got the interlock licence, they don't have to do that, and they can rock and roll and be ready to go, at least in one vehicle, from 29 days after their sentence, depending if they had an injury, accident or not on their set of charges. So if they were just a straight drink driver and they didn't have any death or injuries, we can get these people back into work after a month. They can go and get their license on the 29th day, unless it's a Sunday. And then they can make an appointment with Smart Start or Dragar and get it hooked on, and then they can get back to work. And you can fit them on a truck if they want to drive a truck, but obviously you can't, unless you want to pay to have the interlock on multiple vehicles. You're probably going to just want to put it on one, unless you're very wealthy and you want to put it on lots of vehicles. So you're not going to be able to put it on your customer vehicles, and you can't drive the customer vehicles, and anyone who services the vehicle will have to be very careful, which is why you really need to liaise with the providers who are installing it, so that you don't breach it, because you'll breach the program if you tamper with it. And if anyone, and the client doesn't want their friends to bugger about with it and blow in it to see what the levels are, because if people blow in it and they've got alcohol on their breath, it's going to lock the person out of the vehicle, and that's going to come up as a violation on the record of the machine. And although that's not a crime, if that happens in the last 6 months though, then the client is not going to be able to get off it onto the Xero alcohol license. So they need to take it seriously and look after it.
Yes. What about the person that can't doesn't have the money to have a Xero Interlock license? What are there any means for them to get on the road?
Well, we just discussed that if they were on a benefit, they can apply for the
What if they
subsidy.
can't? What about, so the Xero alcohol isn't available to them? He's saying until after a year. Is that what you're saying?
If the person gets sentenced to an alcohol interlock sentence, they get a disqualification stand-down period to applying for the interlock license. Now, if they do not apply for the interlock license for whatever reasons, they can't be bothered, they never get round to it, they haven't got the money, or sometimes I've actually had this where of their own volition, against all legal advice and paperwork they've ever got, they decide, I'll just stay off the road 12 months and then it'll be all good and I can drive. It doesn't work that way. If you're sentenced to the alcohol interlock sentence and you don't go and get the interlock license and put the interlock on your car and comply with the program, you can't move on to any other class of license. You only get to the Section 65B Xero alcohol license after you've done a year of good behaviour on the interlock. So if you are a defendant and you are never putting your interlock on the car, and it's gone on and you've got a year and you've done absolutely nothing with your sentence, then you're really probably going to need to get a lawyer, because you're going to need to apply to cancel the sentence and then ask for your disqualification to be backdated to when you first got sentenced, and have the alcohol interlock sentence cancelled. I've had to do that for some clients, some young people who thought that they would be able to put it on a company car, and for various reasons.
And what's been the sentence for them once they've been?
Well, for those cases where I've cancelled the alcohol interlock sentence, each of those people had sort of waited out a year before they asked for help. So they had been without any, so they hadn't been, well, generally they didn't have a car to put the interlock on. So I had two young men, I've cancelled for that because they never actually had a car.
So what was the consequences?
I went back to court and I applied to cancel the sentence and to have the disqualification put on them that they would have got had they not got the alcohol interlock sentence. So being a third or subsequent drink driver, that would be a disqualification for at least a year and a day, or longer if it was aggravating and the judge thought that the sentence should be bigger. But for the non-compliant people, if they don't do something about it, they can't drive. And eventually things will come to a head, because either they'll do another crime, like driving while disqualified, and get caught, and then they'll get engaged with the legal system, and then us lawyers will sort it out. So I've just had that with a client actually. So he did a drink drive, the level was over 800. He used a duty lawyer or someone, and he got sentenced to the alcohol interlock sentence. Then he drove around, for a long time without ever going to buy the alcohol interlock license. So he got charged with driving while disqualified. And then we found out that he can't get a Section 94 because the government's amended the Section 94 that if you're subject to an alcohol interlock sentence, you can't get a 94. So I had to motivate him to go to get the alcohol interlock license from the NZTA, and then to go and get the interlock put on his vehicle to be in compliance. And then we're going to apply for a discharge without conviction, because he actually needed a license for his job. So he'd been driving around the whole time for his job in his work vehicle, but while he was disqualified, as they do.
So what's the relationship between the Xero alcohol license and the Interlock license?
It's like the horse and cart, so the interlock is the horse and the cart comes later.
It just would seem reasonable, but I know it's not the case of if you can't get an interlock license, why shouldn't you be able to get a Xero alcohol license instead?
Well, the Xero alcohol license means that you can just drive wherever you like, just with no alcohol. That you do, like if you become, this has become more technical, longer video than we first started to do, but if you argue that you're an exception to the law and you get the exception under the law 65 AI, because you've made an application under section 65 AB subsection 2 that you have grounds under subsection A, B, C, D or E, and you get an exception that you're not going to get the alcohol interlock sentence, then you get disqualified for whatever period the judge thinks is appropriate and not less than the minimum mandatory penalty. So if you're a third or subsequent drink driver, and one of the things is if you don't have access to a car, or you have a medical condition like emphysema, so you can't give a breath reading, or you don't have access to an alcohol interlock installator because you live somewhere very rural, or you've never held a New Zealand driver's license, or your license has been suspended or revoked for reasons such as medical reasons, for epilepsy, or recently I had a client whose licenses were suspended for the truck under section 63 of the Land Transport Act because he committed the drink drive offence in the truck, and the NZTA for public safety reasons immediately disqualified him for 3 years. That then became the disqualification period, so he wasn't allowed the alcohol interlock sentence, even though he did 1,000 breath on the truck, because he had been disqualified for a long period of time by the NZTA. For actually, he got 12 months from the NZTA. So in that case, what happens is they get disqualified for a long time, and the judge gave him 3 years disqualification, and then at the end of that 3 years, then he gets the Xero alcohol license. So the Xero alcohol license follows the period of disqualification. There's nobody goes just, okay, bye-bye, you've been to court, you got sentenced the next day, or 28 days later you're on a Xero alcohol. It doesn't work like that. You get the Xero alcohol at the end of the interlock sentence, or at the end of your disqualification, which will be a long period, 6 months, a year or whatever, then it's the Xero alcohol license.